For more on the global community's response to the Syrian civil war, I spoke to Samer Abboud. He's the assistant professor of history and international studies at Arcadia University in Pennsylvania.
There were sanctions that were put in place by the United States prior to the Syrian revolution. There were really symbolic sanctions that targeted the oil sector, aviation, and some key figures within the regime. Those sanctions were increased and expanded by the United States, but really were quite ineffectual, in part because they didn't target Syrian trade. Syrian regime officials, individuals associated with the army and the security apparatus really didn't have a lot of money or investment located within the United States. The sanctions that have had the biggest effect are those imposed by the European Union, because it effectively cut off the regime's revenue sources by blocking exports of Syrian oil to the European market.
It's not just the economic impact of trade, but also the humanitarian impact of providing assistance at the borders for those refugees that are leaving the area of Syria there. How big of an impact is this on their neighbors, both on a humanitarian standpoint and also economically?
It's difficult to gauge the actual figures, but in Lebanon and Turkey, the economic impact has been tremendous. In Lebanon, it's estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars. You've effectively had a 25% increase in the Lebanese population in a very short time span, and this has placed all sorts of demands on Lebanese services, healthcare, education, housing, and unfortunately, many of the refugees who are coming into the countries do not have the financial means to sustain themselves. And the situation is comparable in Turkey, where people are coming in. They're reliant on the state for the provision of services. They're reliant on aid agencies. And what we see within the camps and outside of the camps is a very rapid deterioration of the health conditions, of the social conditions, of the educational needs of many Syrian children.
Can the international community do more, or should they do more? And I guess this is a very hard question, but how do they do more? What can they do?
Yeah, well, they can certainly do more, and they should do more. I think one of the problems is the international community is now dealing with its policy failures of a year ago or 2 years ago, where they had the ability to affect the trajectory of the conflict and didn't actually do so. The other thing that the international community can do at this point is to put its money where its mouth is and to match the contributions, or to honor the contributions that they have publicly committed to supporting refugees in countries like Lebanon and Turkey.
I want to shift gears to what's happening, and not too far away, over in Ukraine. That crisis entering now a new stage, especially with the elections in Crimea that are going to be taking place here. Your thoughts as to both how the media has covered this situation and what you think a likely outcome might be between the Ukrainian government, this new Ukrainian government, and also what perhaps Vladimir Putin might be wanting to do.
Well, it's clear that the Russians seem to have the same strategy with Ukraine that they have in Syria. That is to completely ignore the threats of the West, to completely ignore any possibility of Western military intervention. I think the Russians are well aware that they hold all the political cards in Ukraine. They clearly hold a lot of the political power within Syria, and they've essentially called all the Western bluffs. They've called the bluff on intervention on chemical weapons, and they're likely of the mindset at this point that whatever they do in Crimea and whatever happens in the rest of Ukraine, that they will be able to control that greater than the West will. This is a larger geopolitical game that the Russians and the Americans are playing now, and unfortunately the Americans and the Western Europeans seem to be losing this. They've lost in Syria, and they seem to be losing the game in Ukraine. We even see resistance within Western Europe to threats against Russia, and I think that this is a sign, as we saw over the course of the Syrian conflict as well, a series of signs that the Russian leadership is taking as a kind of carte blanche to do what it wants to do to achieve its political goals in both countries.
That was Samer Abboud from Arcadia University.